The Denver International Airport buzzed with its usual rhythm, boarding calls echoing, luggage wheels humming across the polished floor. Colonel David Langston adjusted his coat, the sharp creases of his uniform betraying decades of discipline. He was on leave, headed home after a classified briefing at the Pentagon. To most people, he looked like an ordinary traveler, middle-aged, clean-cut, calm. But the military bearing never left him. In his right hand, he held his phone, connected to an encrypted line with his superior, General Naomi Price, discussing logistics for an upcoming mission in Europe. "Just make sure you rest, David," she said with rare warmth. "You've earned it," he smiled faintly. "After 40 years, I might try it for a day." The call stayed open as he moved toward the security gate. Officer Brady Collins, a local police sergeant assigned to airport patrol, noticed him from across the terminal. Something about the man's quiet authority drew his suspicion, or maybe it was the uniform, maybe the skin color. Collins had 17 complaints of profiling in his file, none of which had ever gone anywhere. He watched as Langston adjusted his jacket, his hand brushing near his chest pocket. "Sir!" Collins barked, striding forward, hand already near his gun. "Let me see your ID." Langston turned calmly, used to command presence, not chaos. "Of course, officer. I'm reaching for my identification." His hand moved slowly toward the breast pocket where his military ID sat. Collins saw motion, not intention. The click of a safety echoed, then a gunshot cracked through the terminal. The sound silenced everything. Travelers screamed. Phones flew up, recording. Langston staggered, eyes wide with disbelief as blood spread across his uniform. He fell to one knee, phone still connected. On the other end, General Price froze at the sound. "David? David, what was that?" Langston pressed a trembling hand to his chest. His voice came out steady, defiant. "Colonel David Langston, U.S. Strategic Command." Then the phone hit the floor. Officer Collins stood frozen, weapon trembling in his hand as the echo faded. For a moment, the whole terminal seemed to stop breathing. A child cried somewhere. And from the loudspeaker, the automated voice, calm, robotic, and announced the next flight boarding. As if nothing had happened. General Price's voice still came faintly from the phone lying in a pool of blood. "Security. This is General Naomi Price, Pentagon Command. You've just shot a ranking U.S. officer. Secure the area immediately." It was too late. The cameras were already rolling. The internet was already watching. And the military had already listening. The gunshot echoed far beyond the walls of Denver International Airport. Within seconds, dozens of phones captured the moment Colonel David Langston hit the floor, his uniform stained red, his body motionless, his voice still carrying the calm weight of command. Travelers shouted, ducked, or froze in disbelief. Officer Brady Collins stood paralyzed, weapon still raised, his pulse hammering against the grip. He was reaching for something," he stammered to the first responder who rushed over. "I told him to stop." But his words were already being drowned out by the chaos, and by the cold eye of every recording camera around him. Paramedics burst through the crowd as security tried to clear a perimeter. "Gunshot wound to the chest, low pulse," one shouted. The nurse nearest to Langston froze for half a second when she saw the insignia on his keychain, an eagle crest, the mark of U.S. Strategic Command. "He's military," she murmured. "High-ranking." That realization spread like electricity. The atmosphere shifted from confusion to dread. Back at the Pentagon, General Naomi Price was still on the open call, the sound of panic and alarms bleeding through her headset. Her voice hardened. "Get me Air Force Command on line 1, now." Within minutes, alerts spread through secure military channels across Colorado and Nebraska. The name Colonel David Langston triggered emergency defense protocols that few civilians even knew existed. At the airport, Collins' supervisor, Captain Ron Ellison, pushed through the crowd, pale and sweating. "What the hell happened, Brady?" Collins' voice cracked. He reached fast. "I thought—" "You thought wrong," Ellison snapped, staring at the colonel's ID now in another officer's glove. "Oh, God. You shot a Strategic Command officer." Meanwhile, far away, the first tweets had already gone viral. "Police shoot unarmed black man at Denver airport." Wait, he's an Army colonel? Colonel Langston, justice for David trending. In less than 15 minutes, cable networks interrupted programming. Breaking news, military officer shot by airport police. Reporters speculated wildly. Officials scrambled. The city's police chief, Karen Holt, was already on her way, her phone ringing non-stop. Back at the terminal, Colonel Langston's eyelids fluttered as medics lifted him onto a stretcher. His voice was weak but composed. "Tell General Price. Maintain. Discipline." Then he slipped into unconsciousness. Outside, the 1st Armored Military Convoy rolled out of Buckley Space Force Base, a rapid response unit authorized by General Price herself. For the first time in decades, active-duty vehicles were en route to a civilian facility on American soil. Officer Collins looked up through the glass as the whir of helicopters approached. "What's happening?" he muttered, trembling. His captain didn't answer. He already knew. The military was coming. The night sky over Denver glowed faintly with red and blue lights as military convoys crossed into the city limits. The rhythmic thud of rotor blades grew louder, echoing across the terminal roof. Inside, chaos had collapsed into a strange, fearful silence. Travelers huddled near gates, phones still recording, their faces illuminated by screens flashing breaking news headlines. At 9:27 p.m., the 1st Armored Humvees from Buckley Space Force Base surrounded Denver International Airport. Military police in tactical gear moved with precision. No shouting, no panic, just efficient coordination. The order from General Naomi Price had been clear. Secure the area. Extract Colonel Langston. Detain the shooter. No civilian harm. In the command center, the airport director, Henry Calloway, stared out the window as the first convoy lights appeared on the runway. "Is this an occupation?" he whispered. The security chief swallowed hard. "No, sir. This is the military coming for one of their own." Inside the terminal, paramedics still fought to stabilize Colonel Langston. "BP dropping," one yelled. "We're losing him." Then, from the sliding doors, 6 uniformed officers entered. Army medics led by Major Karen Liu, a trauma surgeon from Buckley. "We're taking over," she announced, flashing authorization papers stamped with the Pentagon seal. The civilian team hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. Meanwhile, Officer Brady Collins sat isolated in a small security office, his hands trembling, eyes locked on the blood still drying on his uniform. The room felt colder with each passing second. His supervisor, Captain Ellison, stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear. "You don't understand," Ellison hissed. "He's not just military, he's strategic command. The Pentagon's listening to everything." He turned toward Collins, eyes burning. "You just lit a fuse this department can't put out." On the tarmac, General Naomi Price landed in a black helicopter, stepping out with a face carved from stone. Cameras captured her arrival. The image of the nation's highest-ranking black woman in uniform, striding across the runway under floodlights, became the instant symbol of what was to come. "Secure all terminals. Establish perimeter control. The colonel lives or this becomes a crisis beyond repair," she ordered. Her phone buzzed. The president's line. "General, confirm your operation." "Confirmed, sir," she said, eyes fixed on the terminal entrance. "We are retrieving an officer unlawfully shot by civilian police." "Naomi," the president warned, "you're on live feeds across the world. Keep it contained." "I intend to," she replied coldly, but containment started dying the moment that trigger was pulled. Inside, as the stretcher rolled past the waiting crowd, someone shouted, "He didn't even have a gun!" Another voice followed, trembling but defiant. "They shot him because he was black." The chant caught fire, spreading through the terminal like a heartbeat. By the time Colonel Langston's body was loaded into the helicopter, the first protest signs were already rising outside the airport gates. Justice for Langston had reached 2 million mentions in under an hour. And at the heart of it all, Officer Brady Collins sat alone, staring at the darkened window as his reflection trembled back at him, realizing that in a single careless second, he had turned a local incident into a national reckoning. By dawn, Denver was no longer just a city, it was a symbol. The streets around the airport swarmed with reporters, protesters, and armed patrols. Television helicopters hovered overhead, broadcasting the surreal image of military vehicles parked beside civilian taxis. For the first time in modern U.S. history, the Pentagon had taken operational control of a domestic site without waiting for civilian clearance. Inside a secure hospital wing at Buckley Medical Center, Colonel David Langston lay unconscious, his chest wrapped in bandages, a ventilator hissing beside him. Monitors beeped steadily, but every doctor in the room knew the truth. He was fighting for his life. At the foot of his bed stood General Naomi Price, arms crossed, eyes locked on her oldest friend. "You survived this," she murmured. "You've led men through wars. Don't let a fool's bullet end your story here." Across town, Denver's police headquarters was in meltdown. Chief Karen Holt slammed her palm against the conference table. "We need control of the narrative before Washington buries us." Her communications director hesitated. "Ma'am, it's already gone. The footage is everywhere. Body cams, civilian clips, even Pentagon feeds. Everyone knows who he was." Holt's face drained of color. "God help us." At that same moment, on every major network, anchors repeated the same words. Colonel David Langston, 40-year Army veteran, senior advisor to the U.S. Strategic Command, shot at Denver International Airport by a local police officer. In the White House Situation Room, the president sat flanked by advisors and military brass. "General Price," he said through secure video, "what's the status?" "Colonel Langston is stable but critical," she replied. "We have full control of the airport. Civilian casualties and none. The officer responsible is in custody." "And the city?" "Protests are spreading, sir. Military presence is keeping order, but optics are deteriorating fast." The president leaned back, rubbing his temple. "The country's on edge. If this spirals, we'll be managing riots coast to coast." At that exact hour, Colonel Langston's son, Evan, a law student at Howard University, stepped before a crowd of cameras outside the Denver courthouse. His voice shook but didn't falter. "My father spent his life serving this country, from Afghanistan to the Pentagon. And now he's fighting for his life because one man saw his skin before his uniform." His words pierced the morning news cycle, igniting another surge of outrage online. Meanwhile, inside his isolation cell, Officer Brady Collins sat hunched over. Hands cuffed, eyes hollow. The silence pressed on him like a weight. His lawyer whispered through the bars, "The Pentagon's pushing for federal jurisdiction. You're being treated as if you shot a general in a war zone." Collins looked up, voice trembling. "I didn't know who he was." "That's the problem," the lawyer said flatly. "You didn't bother to find out." That night, under floodlights, General Price addressed the nation from the Pentagon podium, her uniform immaculate, her tone sharp as steel. Colonel Langston was not a suspect. He was not a threat. He was an American soldier serving under my command. This is not about rank. This is about recognition, the kind every man and woman in uniform deserves, regardless of color. Her words reverberated across living rooms, newsrooms, and barracks nationwide. For a brief, heavy moment, the entire country seemed to hold its breath. And somewhere in a hospital room guarded by soldiers, Colonel Langston's heart monitor skipped, then steadied again, faint but unbroken, like the pulse of a nation teetering between outrage and awakening. Night fell heavy over Denver, the kind of night that makes cities hold their breath. Outside the hospital gates, hundreds gathered with candles, faces lit by flickering light and phone screens showing the same words: "Justice for Colonel Langston." Across the barricades, police officers stood shoulder to shoulder, their riot shields reflecting the glow of the candles like glass between two nations sharing one sky. Inside the hospital, the rhythmic beeping of the monitor was the only sound that mattered. Colonel Langston's pulse was weak but steady, each beat a victory of sheer will. General Naomi Price stood by his bedside, arms clasped behind her back, refusing to sit. For hours she hadn't moved, her eyes fixed on the unconscious man who had mentored her through her first command. "You faced insurgents and storms," she whispered. "Don't let ignorance take you down." Her aide, Major Karen Liu, stepped in quietly. "Ma'am, the president's requesting another update." Price's gaze didn't shift. "Tell him the colonel's alive and that's all that matters tonight." "Yes, General." And Lou hesitated. "There's something else. The Denver police chief just resigned, and Officer Collins has been placed under military custody." Naomi turned then, her eyes sharp. "Military custody?" "Yes, ma'am. By federal order. They're invoking Title 10, classifying the case as an attack on national security personnel." Price exhaled slowly. "Good. Maybe now this country will pay attention." Meanwhile, in the dim confines of an interrogation room deep beneath the airport, Officer Brady Collins sat shackled to a metal chair. His once steady hand shook uncontrollably. Across from him sat Colonel Ethan Morales, a military investigator with the quiet authority of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to dominate a room. "Do you understand what you've done, Sergeant?" he asked. Collins swallowed. It was instinct. He moved fast. "You thought wrong," Morales interrupted coldly. "You shot a senior Pentagon strategist unarmed in full compliance." "And you did it because you saw a threat that wasn't there." Collins's voice cracked. "I didn't mean to." "That's the problem," Morales said, leaning forward. "You never mean to." "None of you ever do." At that moment, outside the precinct, protesters clashed with police barricades. Tear gas bloomed like smoke from a broken dream. The chant was deafening now. "Say his name, David Langston!" "Justice now!" News anchors called it the Langston Uprising. Social feeds called it America's breaking point. In the Pentagon Situation Room, General Price watched live drone footage of the chaos below. She spoke without looking away. "This isn't just about one bullet, gentlemen. This is about centuries of them." Her aide asked softly, "What do you want us to do, ma'am?" "Not yet," she replied. "Let the nation look at itself first." As midnight crept toward morning, the hospital wing fell silent again. The protests quieted, sirens faded, and even the sky seemed still. Then, faintly, a whisper broke the quiet. Colonel Langston's lips moved. "Naomi." She froze, leaning in close. "I'm here, David." His eyes fluttered open, weak but burning with life. "Tell them, no war. Not against them. Just truth." Naomi's throat tightened. "Rest, Colonel. The world's already listening, and as dawn approached, the faint hum of helicopters over Denver carried not just the sound of power, but the echo of a single man's heartbeat, steady again, defying the silence that had tried to bury him. Morning sunlight crept through the blinds of Buckley Military Hospital, slicing through the sterile quiet. Colonel David Langston was awake, pale, weak, but conscious. His breath came shallow, each word costing effort, but his eyes had lost none of their command. The news had already leaked. Colonel Langston regains consciousness. Within an hour, cameras swarmed outside the facility gates. Inside the secured wing, General Naomi Price entered the room flanked by 2 aides and a military recorder. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped. She smiled faintly. "You said truth, not rest." He chuckled softly, then winced. "Has it started?" "Started?" He gestured weakly toward the window where faint chanting echoed from beyond the barricades. "That." Naomi's expression hardened. "Yes, the protests are spreading. Atlanta, Chicago, D.C. Half the country's marching under your name." Langston sighed. "That's not what I wanted. I wanted accountability, not chaos." She nodded slowly. "Then give them clarity, David. Tell the truth yourself." By noon, a press briefing had been arranged, broadcast live directly from the Pentagon's medical division. Langston sat upright in his hospital bed, uniform jacket draped over the blanket, IV still in his arm. Cameras clicked, lights glared. He looked fragile, but his voice, when it came, was iron. "My name is Colonel David Langston. I have served this nation for 40 years. Yesterday I was shot, not in combat, but at home. Not by an enemy, but by a man sworn to protect his own citizens." The reporters fell silent. "I do not hate him," Langston continued. "Hatred is what blinded him in the first place. What I ask, what I demand is reform, not revenge. If my blood buys awareness, then let it buy change, not division." The nation listened. Even those who disagreed could not look away. His voice carried across screens, radios, and hearts, a soldier bleeding not for war, but for peace. That same hour, Officer Brady Collins watched the speech from a steel holding cell, the flickering TV light washing over his haunted face. Langston's words seemed to cut through the air like a confession addressed directly to him. Reform, not revenge. Collins whispered those words again and again, as if trying to understand them. At police headquarters, Captain Ellison sat before federal investigators, his hands trembling. "You want the truth?" he said bitterly. That wasn't the first complaint. Collins should have been suspended months ago, maybe years. But we protected him. We protect all of them, because that's the culture. He looked up, eyes red. And now a good man almost died for it. In Washington, the president convened an emergency meeting. General Price stood before the Joint Chiefs, her tone clipped. "Sir, we can't treat this as an isolated incident. The system failed, not just one man. We need a national policing reform task force under federal oversight." The president hesitated. "You're suggesting a military-backed investigation into domestic law enforcement?" Naomi met his eyes. "No, Mr. President, I'm suggesting accountability. The same kind we demand from every soldier who ever pulled a trigger." By nightfall, the federal order was signed. Operation Sentinel, a joint civilian-military initiative to audit police conduct nationwide. It was the most sweeping reform since the civil rights era. And it began because one man refused to die quietly. Later that night, when the cameras were gone and the corridors were dark again, Naomi returned to Langston's bedside. "You changed everything today," she whispered. He smiled faintly, eyes closed. "Then let's hope they change with it." And as the monitors hummed softly beside him, the nation, divided, angry, awake, began to feel the first fragile stirrings of something it hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. 3 weeks later, the storm had shifted, not disappeared, but changed shape. Across America, marches continued under banners reading "Justice, Not War," and "Langston Lives." What had started as outrage had become a movement. Talk shows, political debates, even military town halls revolved around one question: how could this happen to a man like him? At the Pentagon, General Naomi Price stood before a wall of screens showing live feeds from protests across the nation. "Operation Sentinel has exposed 43 departments with consistent racial bias reports," her aide read aloud. "6 already under federal review?" Naomi nodded. "And Collins?" "Awaiting federal trial. His lawyer's pushing insanity, but the evidence is overwhelming. His body cam, his messages, the internal reports." She closed the file slowly. "No more hiding behind fear." Not for him. Not for anyone. At Denver Federal Courthouse, the trial began. The courtroom was silent when Colonel David Langston entered, cane in hand, uniform crisp, posture straight despite the scar pulling at his chest. The judge's gavel echoed like a heartbeat. "All rise." Cameras captured the moment. The man who'd nearly died standing face to face with the man who shot him. Brady Collins avoided his gaze at first, but when Langston took the stand, their eyes met. One pair filled with guilt, the other with unyielding calm. The prosecutor's voice broke the silence. "Colonel Langston, can you describe the moment of the shooting?" Langston's voice was quiet but precise. "I was told to show identification." I complied. I announced my intent. Then, the shot came. I remember the sound more than the pain. I remember thinking, so this is what it feels like to become a statistic. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even Collins seemed to shrink under the weight of those words. The defense tried to argue reasonable threat perception, but the surveillance footage and multiple recordings told a different story, one of fear, prejudice, and rash instinct. When the verdict came, it was swift. On all counts, assault on a federal officer, excessive use of force, and violation of civil rights, the defendant is found guilty. Collins's head dropped. His career, his freedom, and the illusion of justification all ended in that single word. But even then, Langston's expression remained solemn, not triumphant. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed him. "Colonel, what does justice mean to you now?" one shouted. Langston paused before answering. "Justice isn't punishment. It's understanding. But understanding means accountability. For him, for me, for all of us. That evening, back at Buckley Base, General Price joined Langston on the observation deck overlooking the city lights. "The trial's over," she said softly. "But the work's just beginning." Langston nodded, his voice low. "Justice isn't a verdict, Naomi. It's maintenance, something you keep alive every day, or it dies quietly in your hands." Down below, the city glowed, no longer in protest fires but in quiet resilience. For the first time in weeks, Denver slept without sirens, and for the first time in months, the nation exhaled. A year later, the snow fell softly over Washington, D.C., blanketing the city in a quiet that felt almost ceremonial. Inside the Pentagon's Hall of Honor, hundreds of officers, diplomats, and civilians gathered for a single purpose: to witness Colonel David Langston's return to duty. Cameras flashed as the man once left bleeding on an airport floor stood tall again, the scar beneath his uniform a silent badge of survival. General Naomi Price approached the podium, her voice steady but proud. A year ago, the nation almost lost one of its finest. But from tragedy came clarity, a reminder that courage doesn't end on the battlefield. Sometimes it begins in recovery. She turned toward Langston, who gave a small nod before stepping forward to speak. "When I was lying on that floor," Langston began, "I remember thinking not about dying but about what my death would mean. Whether people would see me as a threat or as a man. I lived. So now I have a duty, not just to serve but to help this country see better." The audience fell silent. Even the flash of cameras slowed. "We have rebuilt something here, not just a policy, but a promise," he continued. Operation Sentinel wasn't about revenge. It was about remembrance. That every uniform, every badge, every oath means nothing if justice doesn't live beneath it. Outside, life carried on differently. Police academies now taught the Langston Protocol, a federal training standard emphasizing restraint, bias recognition, and respect in use of force decisions. Across the country, Operation Sentinel had restructured more than 70 departments. Complaints of profiling had dropped by half. Trust, though fragile, had begun to return. At Denver International Airport, the place where it all began, a bronze plaque stood quietly near Gate C-12, in honor of Colonel David Langston, for the courage to stand and the grace to forgive. That evening, Langston walked that same terminal once more, cane tapping softly against the polished floor. Travelers moved past him unaware, their laughter echoing through the same corridors that had once fallen silent from a gunshot. He paused where he had fallen, now just another square of tile among thousands, and smiled faintly. "Full circle," he whispered, from a nearby monitor. A news report played faintly. Former Officer Brady Collins continues anti-bias advocacy from federal custody, participating in reform education programs under the Langston Initiative. Langston turned away, exhaling slowly. "Redemption," he murmured. "Sometimes it does find its way home." Outside, snow continued to fall, soft, endless, and cleansing. As the camera of the world slowly panned back, the lights of the airport glimmered like small stars beneath the winter sky. Justice had not been perfect, but it had finally been possible,